The galaxy once measured war by the distance his shadow traveled across the stars. He was called a king not because he ruled worlds, but because warriors chose to follow him even when survival was uncertain. His banners never promised safety, only purpose. Wherever his fleets arrived, conflicts ended quickly, either through decisive victory or honorable surrender. Enemy commanders hated him, yet studied him. Allies praised him, yet feared becoming unnecessary beneath his command. He did not conquer for expansion, nor destroy for spectacle. He fought because chaos spreads when strength refuses responsibility. The final war was unlike the others. It was not a border clash or a resource dispute. It was an extinction spiral, a threat that devoured systems whole, leaving nothing but sterilized orbits and silent debris. One by one, alien civilizations panicked, retreating into isolation. It was the warrior king who answered the call no one wanted to answer. He unified rivals who had never trusted each other, forged battle doctrines between incompatible species, and led from the front when no one asked him to. Victory demanded a price beyond fleets and fuel. It demanded him. The decisive battle lasted less than an hour and rewrote centuries of fear. The enemy collapsed under coordinated strikes only he could orchestrate. When the last hostile signal faded, the coalition celebrated too early. His flagship drifted out of formation, hull split, internal gravity failing. He had rerouted power manually to shield civilian carriers, exposing himself to the blast that ended the war. His body survived barely. His strength did not. Nerve damage locked half his form in useless silence. Life support systems kept him breathing, not living. At first, the Allied fleet stayed close. Messages of gratitude flooded his command channel. Medics argued over treatment options. Strategists discussed succession. Then calculations replaced concern. His injuries were permanent. His combat effectiveness was gone. The same admirals who once deferred to his instincts now questioned the cost of preserving him. Resources were finite. Stability was fragile. A symbol who could no longer fight was not a symbol worth protecting. One fleet disengaged, citing reactor limitations. Another followed, claiming defensive obligations at home. Medical ships withdrew after transmitting condolences disguised as protocols. The coalition thinned until only automated escorts remained, circling him like witnesses afraid to intervene. No one ordered his execution. No one needed to. Silence was enough. From his drifting bridge, the warrior king watched departure vectors vanish into starlight. He did not curse them. He understood their logic. Every civilization preached honor until survival demanded efficiency. He had believed unity could outlast fear. That belief failed faster than his body. With failing systems and no rescue authorization, he prepared himself for the ending warriors fear most, not death in battle, but abandonment after victory. He recorded a final log, not as an accusation, but as closure. He acknowledged the war was won. He released his remaining escorts from duty. When power levels dropped, he deactivated non-essential systems to slow the inevitable. The galaxy had been saved. The galaxy had moved on. As the lights dimmed and the stars outside blurred into distant echoes, the warrior king accepted that legends are useful only while they function. When they break, they are discarded quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. In the vast emptiness between systems, the greatest warrior of the age waited to die, convinced that this, at last, was the true law of the universe. The decision to let him die was never spoken as a sentence, only as a conclusion everyone reached at the same time. Across secure channels and sealed chambers, leaders of the victorious coalition convened, not in anger or grief, but in calm efficiency. The war was over. Stability had to follow. Emotion was considered a liability now that survival was no longer at stake. They reviewed projections first. Medical recovery, negligible. Combat viability, 0. Symbolic value, declining. The warrior king, once a unifying force, had become an unpredictable variable. His survival demanded constant resources, protective fleets, and political explanations. His death required none of that. It would resolve itself naturally, cleanly, without scandal. No orders needed to be written. Each civilization justified the outcome in its own language. The militarists argued that a leader unable to fight invited weakness. The technocracies reduced him to inefficiency metrics, his existence categorized as a net loss. Trade empires found no advantage in preserving a figure who could no longer enforce agreements. Even cultures that spoke of honor reframed it carefully, claiming that allowing him to fade spared him the indignity of helplessness. They rewrote the narrative while his heart still beat. Records were amended to emphasize collective victory rather than individual sacrifice. Speeches were drafted that praised his past without committing to his present. Memorials were planned, abstract and distant, designed to inspire without reminding anyone of what had been abandoned. History, after all, favored the living. A quarantine designation was quietly issued around his drifting vessel. Officially, it was for safety. Unofficially, it ensured no inconvenient rescues occurred. Automated warnings were programmed to discourage approach. Any interference would be labeled reckless, destabilizing, or hostile. The galaxy prefers threats it can name. Fragments of these deliberations reached him through delayed transmissions and leaked data bursts. He listened as voices he once trusted discussed him as a problem already solved. They spoke his name with respect and their decisions with indifference. None sounded cruel. That was what broke him. Cruelty could have been resisted. Indifference could not. He understood them too well to hate them. Every doctrine he had taught them was being applied perfectly. Sacrifice for the greater whole. Eliminate risks before they spread. Protect the many, even if it means discarding the few. He had lived by those principles. Now he was their cost. Outside the chambers, the wider galaxy followed the cue. News outlets shifted focus to reconstruction. Analysts praised the coalition's pragmatism. The warrior king became a resolved chapter, a heroic figure whose story conveniently ended at victory. No one asked where he was now. No one wanted the answer. As his life support system strained and the emptiness pressed closer, he confronted a realization more painful than any wound. The unity he had forged was real, but shallow. It existed only while fear demanded it. Once the threat was gone, loyalty reverted to self-preservation. The galaxy had not betrayed him. It had simply revealed itself. He closed his eyes and let the remaining power drain slowly, conserving what little time remained. He did not beg. He did not broadcast distress. Warriors, he believed, should face the end with dignity. If this was how the universe rewarded those who gave everything, then the universe was at least consistent. Somewhere beyond the quarantine perimeter, stars burned on, indifferent and eternal. The coalition prepared to move forward, convinced the matter was finished. None of them considered the possibility that someone else might hear what they chose to ignore. The signal reached human space as static first, a ghost buried beneath routine traffic and long-range noise. It carried no priority marker, no request code recognized by human databases, only a repeating identifier flagged by other civilizations as resolved. To most monitoring systems, it was debris echo. To a junior human analyst, it sounded wrong. Resolved signals were not supposed to fluctuate. They did not weaken and strengthen like a heartbeat struggling to continue. Protocol demanded verification and then dismissal. The analyst flagged it anyway. Within minutes, the data reached a patrol vessel operating far from major routes, a ship tasked with observing borders humans had no claim to and little interest in expanding. The captain listened in silence as the decoded fragments played out. Power failure warnings. Life support degradation. A quarantine advisory stamped by half the known coalition. The final tag read abandoned asset. The bridge did not erupt into debate. It grew quiet. Humans were new to the wider galaxy, still learning its rules, still treated as peripheral observers. They had already learned enough to recognize a pattern. Someone important had been deemed inconvenient. Someone alive had been categorized as finished. They pulled up the archived war records. The names surfaced immediately, heavy with annotations and suppressed footage. The warrior king. The same figure taught in tactical academies as an example of coordination beyond species boundaries. The same commander cited by alien instructors with something close to reverence. The timeline ended abruptly after the final battle. No recovery reports followed. No funeral record either. The patrol ship altered course before approval was requested. That choice alone carried consequences. Quarantine zones existed for reasons, and violating one placed a mark on any vessel reckless enough to ignore it. Automated warnings flooded their comms as they crossed the boundary. Legal threats. Liability disclaimers. Citations of interstellar accords humans had signed without memorizing. The captain silenced them all. As they closed the distance, the drifting flagship came into view, its hull scarred, systems flickering in uneven pulses. Life signs were minimal, barely distinguishable from background radiation. Most species would have written it off as mercy to leave it alone. Humans had a different threshold for that word. Boarding teams moved fast, not knowing what they would find, only that time mattered. Inside, gravity was inconsistent, corridors cold and dim. The air carried the sterile scent of systems running past design limits. They found him where command would be, secured in failing restraints, massive and still, sustained by technology older than human spaceflight. His injuries were extensive, catastrophic by any standard. The readings suggested he should not have been conscious. Yet his eyes opened when they approached. He expected scavengers or hallucinations. What he saw instead were unfamiliar forms moving with urgency that had nothing to do with profit or protocol. They did not announce demands. They did not request authorization. They spoke to each other in clipped tones, calling out vitals, rerouting power, stabilizing systems that no one else had deemed worth stabilizing. Medical personnel worked without hesitation, overriding safeguards that limited risk exposure. Every calculation said this rescue was inefficient. Every instinct said it was necessary. When his failing systems surged briefly under human intervention, disbelief crossed his expression. He tried to speak. One of them told him not to waste the energy. He searched their faces for motive. There was none he recognized. No reverence. No fear. Just focus. When he finally managed to ask why they were there, the answer came without ceremony. They had heard a signal. Someone was still alive. That was enough. Beyond the quarantine line, alarms registered the violation. Observers took note. Records updated. Humanity was flagged as non-compliant, emotionally driven, strategically naive. None of that mattered aboard the patrol ship as it turned away from the place where a legend had been left to die, carrying with it a choice the rest of the galaxy had refused to make. The humans worked as if failure were not an option they were allowed to consider. Power was rerouted from non-essential systems, then from systems that were technically essential but morally negotiable. Life support stabilized, then dipped, then steadied again. Each time alarms sounded, someone silenced them and kept going. They spoke in short exchanges, not to reassure him, but to coordinate. Nothing about their behavior suggested they expected gratitude or reward. The warrior king watched through fading clarity, as they refused to step away even when his readings worsened. He recognized the signs of triage, the point where most species would preserve the many over the one. When that moment came, the humans did not retreat. They adapted. They brought in equipment not designed for his biology, modified it in real time, and absorbed the risk without debate. When he found enough strength to speak again, the question came out rough and direct. Why were they doing this? The data said he was not worth the cost. The galaxy had agreed on that. He needed to understand what calculation they were using. The response was not immediate. A medic continued adjusting a stabilizer before answering, eyes never leaving the display. Because leaving someone behind is how things fall apart, she said. Another added that if survival required becoming the kind of people who walk away, then survival was not the goal. There was no defiance in their voices, only certainty. He tested them, expecting conditions to surface eventually. Alliance offers. Strategic leverage. Access to his knowledge. None came. They asked only questions necessary to keep him alive. When one of them learned his name, they used it once, carefully, then returned to their work. To them, He was not a legend. He was a patient. During the long hours that followed, fragments of human history surfaced in quiet conversation. Stories of soldiers carried from battlefields long after hope had thinned. Of rescue missions launched for enemies because someone was still breathing. Of disasters where survival rates did not justify response, yet response came anyway. Not as doctrine. As habit. Alien observers monitoring from a distance struggled to classify what they were seeing. The humans were not acting irrationally. They were acting consistently. That was the problem. Their behavior did not shift with odds or optics. It followed an internal rule that did not bend when the environment changed. For civilizations built on adaptive logic, this was unsettling. The warrior king felt something unfamiliar settle beneath the pain. It was not relief. It was recognition. The galaxy he had defended claimed honor as a principle, but treated it as decoration. These humans treated it as infrastructure. Something everything else depended on, even when it was inconvenient. When complications worsened and evacuation windows narrowed, the captain was informed of potential repercussions. Sanctions. Restricted access. Loss of trust. She acknowledged the message and ordered the course maintained. If consequences were coming, they would come later. Right now, someone was still alive. The warrior king realized then that the galaxy had misjudged humanity not by underestimating their strength, but by misunderstanding their danger. They did not abandon rules when pressure rose. They refused to. That refusal made them unpredictable, difficult to coerce, and impossible to intimidate in the ways other species understood. As his systems finally stabilized and consciousness no longer felt like a borrowed privilege, he understood why the others had left him. They believed honor was optional. The humans did not. And in that difference, he saw the future of every alliance yet to come, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. Recovery was slow, measured not in days but in choices repeatedly made to continue. The humans never framed his survival as a miracle. They treated it as the outcome of persistence. When his condition stabilized beyond immediate collapse, they did not celebrate. They adjusted schedules, expanded protection, and prepared for consequences they knew were coming. Saving him had never been the risky part. Standing by that decision would be. The wider galaxy reacted exactly as expected. Diplomatic channels flooded human command with objections carefully worded as concern. They cited treaties, quarantine violations, and destabilizing precedent. Some warned that preserving the warrior king invited unrest among his people. Others implied that humanity was attempting to claim symbolic ownership over a figure larger than any single species. Humans responded minimally. They did not argue intent. They acknowledged receipt and continued. When the warrior king was strong enough to address external transmissions, he requested an open broadcast. The humans neither encouraged nor blocked it. They provided access and stood aside. His image appeared across coalition networks, not as the invincible commander history preferred, but as proof of what had been abandoned. His voice carried the strain of survival, steady but unembellished. He did not accuse. He named facts. He listed the fleets that had withdrawn, the councils that had declared him resolved, the protocols that had defined him as acceptable loss. Each statement was precise, unemotional, impossible to refute. Then he named the species that had crossed the quarantine without permission, the one that had treated his life as non-negotiable. The effect was immediate and uneven. Some governments attempted damage control. Others went silent. Among his people, something hardened. Loyalty is fragile when based on convenience. It becomes unbreakable when tied to memory. They had not forgotten who stood with their king when strength was gone. Realignment followed, not as rebellion, but as correction. Treaties were reconsidered. Trade routes shifted. Military cooperation quietly restructured itself around human coordination. Not because humans demanded it, but because reliability is the rarest currency in interstellar politics. The warrior king's endorsement carried weight no threat could replicate. Humanity found itself reclassified. No longer peripheral. No longer naive. Other civilizations began to describe them with caution. Not because of fleet size or weapon yield, but because they intervened when logic advised retreat. They carried risk the way others carried arms. The warrior king returned to his people changed. He no longer spoke of unity built on fear. He spoke of alliances tested by loss. Of the difference between civilizations that protect ideals and those that discard them under pressure. His survival became less important than the lesson it carried. In private, he addressed the humans one final time before departing their protection. He acknowledged the cost they had accepted without complaint. He told them a truth earned through abandonment. Empires rise and fall, but those who do not leave their wounded behind shape history long after battles end. The humans did not ask for loyalty in return. They received it anyway. Across the galaxy, leaders adjusted strategies, unsure how to counter a species that treated mercy as a fixed point rather than a weakness. The precedent had been set. Someone left to die had been retrieved. Someone written off had spoken. And everyone now understood that if humanity chose to stand beside you, they would not move, no matter how expensive it became. That knowledge settled into the fabric of galactic politics, quiet and permanent. The universe had learned something new. Strength could abandon you. Honor, in human hands, would not.